My daughter was standing in an airport lounge, champagne glass in hand, bragging about a $20,000 luxury vacation she paid for with my credit cards, without my permission. I smiled. Then, while her plane was still in the air, I canceled everything. The call came late in the afternoon. I was sitting in my home office, leather chair worn smooth after decades of use, sunlight slanting across framed certificates on the wall. Retirement had been kind to me. Quiet mornings, predictable routines, a life built on discipline and restraint. "Dad, this place is insane," my daughter said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The presidential suite has a private balcony. You can literally see dolphins from the bedroom." "That sounds wonderful," I replied calmly. "Which resort?" "The Oceanfront Grand. 5-star everything. Helicopter tours, private dining, the works." My pen tapped once against the desk. I asked the question gently, casually, the way a father does when he already knows the answer. "And how much is all this costing you?" There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second too long. "Oh, you know," she laughed. "We've been saving. Ryan got a bonus. I picked up extra hours." I said nothing. I didn't need to. I'd been a banker for 35 years. Numbers told the truth, even when people didn't. After we hung up, I logged into my account. Every charge was there. Flights, resort, rental car, helicopter tour, fine dining reservations, all on the emergency credit card I'd given her years ago. A card she promised she would only use if she truly needed help. Nearly $20,000. Stolen. When I called her back and asked directly, she didn't hesitate. She lied. Not awkwardly, not nervously, smoothly. She told me someone must have stolen my card information. She suggested I call the bank. She even sounded concerned for me. That was the moment something inside me went cold. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse her. I wished her a wonderful trip and told her to enjoy every second. Then I waited. At 11:47 that night, when her Instagram story showed the plane descending over the ocean, I made my first call. The resort. The presidential suite canceled. Non-refundable. Fine. The rental car was next. Then the helicopter tour. Then every reservation tied to my card. Finally, I logged into my account and removed her as an authorized user. One click. Confirmed. I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up naturally. No alarm, no stress. Sunlight filled the kitchen as I poured my coffee. My phone lit up. 15 missed calls, all from her. I didn't rush to answer. I took my time, read the paper, ate breakfast, let the lesson begin forming on its own. Because this wasn't about money. It was about betrayal, about entitlement, about a grown adult who believed family meant consequences didn't apply. And she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I wasn't always the man sitting in a quiet house with a leather chair and framed certificates on the wall. Before retirement, before comfort, before financial stability, I was just a young father trying to keep the lights on and food on the table. My daughter doesn't remember those years. Children rarely do. I do. I remember waking up at 500 a.m. for 3 decades straight, drinking burnt coffee in the dark while the rest of the house slept. I remember driving to work before sunrise and coming home after sunset, my tie loosened, my back aching, my head full of numbers that never stopped moving. Banking looks clean from the outside, but it demands precision, responsibility, and an appetite for pressure that never turns off. Every decision I made had consequences, and every dollar I earned had a purpose. Her. When her mother and I divorced, I became both parents overnight. I packed lunches. I attended parent-teacher conferences alone. I sat in folding chairs at school plays after 12-hour workdays, clapping until my hands hurt because she was smiling on stage and looking for me in the crowd. Money was always tight in those early years, but I never let her feel it. When she wanted piano lessons, I found the money. $200 a month. When she wanted dance classes, that was another $300. When she needed braces, I paid the orthodontist $12,000 without blinking. I told myself that was my job. College came next. She wanted a private university, not the state school I suggested, not the scholarship route. A private school with a reputation, a campus she fell in love with during a tour. I said yes. 4 years, full tuition, room and board, books, fees, $160,000. I paid every semester on time. Never asked her to work part-time. Never told her to take loans. I wanted her focused on her future, not distracted by stress. When she graduated, she hugged me and cried, telling everyone I was the best father in the world. I believed her. Then came the car. She didn't want something practical. She wanted something that wouldn't embarrass her. Her words, not mine. A new BMW convertible, $38,000. I tried to argue. She cried. I gave in. She totaled it 6 months later. I replaced it with something more reasonable, another $15,000. Apartments followed, security deposits, first month's rent, furniture, emergency payments when she overspent and came up short. Over the years, that added another $34,000. Then there were the credit cards. The first time she asked for help paying one off, I told myself it was a lesson learned. I paid $28,000 across several cards, assuming she'd be more careful next time. She wasn't. When she turned 25, I set up a trust fund, $50,000, a cushion, something to help her build a stable adult life. She burned through it in 18 months. I never confronted her, never demanded explanations. I told myself she was young, that she'd mature, that love meant patience. By the time she turned 29, I had quietly spent more than $345,000 on her adult life alone. That didn't include food, clothes, vacations, birthdays, Christmases, or the countless untracked expenses of raising a child. $345,000. Freely given. Unconditional. What hurts most isn't the number. It's the contrast. Because I have a son, Michael. Michael grew up in the same house, with the same father, under the same rules. The difference was choice. Michael worked part-time in high school, bought his own used car, paid his way through community college before transferring to a state university. When he needed help, he asked. When I helped, he repaid me. Every time. Once, his car broke down, and he needed a small loan. He paid it back in 2 months with interest. When he got married, he asked if I could help with expenses. When I offered to cover everything, he refused and insisted on paying half himself. Total financial help I've given Michael in his adult life, $8,500, every penny accounted for. That contrast didn't happen overnight. It was built slowly, reinforced every time I said yes without limits, every time I rescued instead of taught. I see that now. Back then, I thought generosity was love. I thought sacrifice was proof of devotion. I thought providing meant protecting her from hardship. What I actually did was teach her that money appeared when she wanted it, that consequences were negotiable, that my role was to clean up after her mistakes. I created comfort without responsibility, and comfort without responsibility breeds entitlement. When she used my credit card for that vacation, she didn't see it as stealing. In her mind, it was borrowing, temporary, harmless, something I'd eventually understand. After all, hadn't I always? What she didn't understand was that every dollar I gave her had a cost. Years of discipline, missed vacations of my own, cars I didn't buy, clothes I didn't replace. Risk carried quietly so she wouldn't have to. I wasn't wealthy by accident. I built that life carefully, brick by brick, decision by decision. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a resource. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me clear. Because sacrifice, when it goes unrecognized, turns into resentment. And love, without boundaries, turns into weakness. I wasn't going to be weak anymore. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. That was the most unsettling part. It crept in quietly, disguised as normal everyday moments. Small conversations, casual requests, tiny lies that felt harmless on the surface. The kind you forgive without thinking because you're a parent and forgiveness feels automatic. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. I just didn't want to see them. It started with tone. The way she spoke to me changed before her actions did. Less warmth, less patience. Our phone calls became shorter. When I asked how work was going, she brushed it off. When I offered advice, she sounded irritated, like I was out of touch. Once, during a visit, she glanced around my living room and laughed. "You should really update this place, Dad. It feels old." I smiled and shrugged it off, but something tightened in my chest. This house had paid for her education. This furniture had survived decades of responsibility. Old didn't mean worthless. Then came the subtle expectations. She stopped asking for help and started assuming it. A missed rent payment that somehow ended up on my card. A dinner charge she forgot to mention. A weekend getaway she described casually, never explaining how she paid for it. Each time I told myself it was temporary. That should mention it later. That should settle things eventually. She didn't. Instead, she grew more comfortable. I noticed how she talked about money, not with respect, but with confidence that didn't match her income. She spoke about luxury hotels like they were normal, about expensive dinners as if they were routine. When I asked how she was managing financially, she laughed. "I'm doing fine, Dad. You worry too much." That was new. Dismissiveness instead of gratitude. The lies were small at first, innocent sounding, carefully worded. When I asked about a charge I didn't recognize, she said a friend had paid her back. When I questioned another expense, she said it was an emergency she'd already handled. She never sounded nervous. She sounded practiced. The truth is, entitlement doesn't announce itself loudly. It grows in silence, fed by patterns. Every time I covered for her, every time I didn't ask for accountability, every time I chose peace over discomfort, I told myself I was being a good father. What I was really doing was teaching her that explanations were optional, that accountability was negotiable, that my money didn't require respect. The most painful realization came when I compared her behavior to her brother's. Michael still called just to talk, still asked before making decisions, still thanked me for advice, even when he didn't follow it. When he struggled, He explained. When he succeeded, he shared the credit. She stopped doing all of that. Conversations with her became transactional, without ever saying so outright. She'd call when she needed something, disappear when she didn't. If I didn't immediately agree with her, she grew distant. Once, when I gently suggested she budget more carefully, she snapped. "You don't understand how hard things are right now." I almost laughed. I had worked 12-hour days for decades. I'd balanced risk and responsibility when failure meant losing everything. But in her mind, struggle only counted if it was hers. That was the moment I felt something shift. Not anger, awareness. I began paying closer attention, not accusing, just observing. I noticed how she never talked about saving, how her lifestyle never matched her income, how she deflected every question about money with charm or irritation. And slowly, painfully, I understood something I'd been avoiding. She wasn't careless. She was confident. Confident that I would always be there. Confident that boundaries didn't apply. Confident that family meant immunity from consequences. The credit card she used wasn't just plastic to her. It was permission. Silent approval. Proof that nothing had really changed, no matter how old she got. By the time I checked my statements more carefully, the pattern was undeniable. Charges spread across months. Restaurants, shopping, hotels. Always just under the amount that would trigger attention. It wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. And still, part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, a mistake that could be corrected with a conversation. That part of me was still her father. But another part had started waking up. The part that had built a career on facts, not feelings, on patterns, not excuses, on consequences, not intentions. I realized something uncomfortable that night, staring at those statements. This wasn't about a vacation. It was about who she had become, and more importantly, about who I had allowed her to become. I had spent years protecting her from consequences. Now those consequences had arrived, and she had no idea how to face them. That was my failure. But it wasn't too late to stop making it worse. The decay had been subtle. The response would not be. The moment that broke everything wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears, just numbers. I was sitting at my desk late one evening, the house quiet except for the ticking of an old wall clock. I had logged into my credit card account for what I told myself was a routine review, the kind of habit you keep after spending a lifetime in finance. I didn't expect surprises. What I found instead was a pattern. At first glance, nothing looked outrageous. No single charge screamed disaster. But when I scrolled back month by month, the picture became impossible to ignore. Restaurants I didn't recognize. Boutique stores she'd sworn she hadn't visited. Weekend hotel charges she'd never mentioned. Airline tickets that didn't line up with any trips she'd told me about. The dates told a story my heart didn't want to accept. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It had been happening for months. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing the numbers down, one charge at a time. No emotion, just documentation. 400 here, 800 there. 1,000 gone quietly on a purse she said was a gift.
Another hotel stay explained away as a work thing. When I added it all up, my hand froze mid-calculation. $23,470. Stolen. Not borrowed, not misunderstood, taken. I stared at the total for a long time, waiting for anger to hit. It didn't. What I felt instead was something worse. Clarity. The next morning, I called her. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked, "Are you using my credit card?" There was a pause. 4 seconds. I counted them. Then she lied. Smoothly, effortlessly. She told me someone must have stolen my card information. She suggested fraud. She even told me I should be careful. I thanked her. That lie told me everything I needed to know. When I canceled the vacation and removed her access, I still hadn't confronted her directly. Part of me hoped she'd call and confess, admit it, apologize. She didn't. Instead, she panicked.
15 missed calls, messages piling up, confusion turning into frustration. When I finally answered, her tone was sharp. "What did you do?" I asked her to be specific. "Our hotel canceled everything. The car, the tours. None of our cards are working." I let the silence stretch. Then I said it plainly. I canceled them. She laughed. Actually laughed. "You can't do that." I already did. That was when the mask slipped. She didn't apologize. She didn't deny it anymore. She justified it. "It's not like I stole from a stranger," she said. "You're my father. It's family money." Family money. The phrase landed harder than any insult. I felt something inside me collapse. Not explode, collapse. Like a structure that had been standing too long on a rotten foundation. "That money," I said slowly, "is money I earned." "So?" she snapped. "It's mine eventually anyway. I was just borrowing it." Borrowing. Without asking, without permission, without intent to repay. I realized then that she truly didn't understand what she'd done. Not because she was confused, but because she didn't believe rules applied to her. In her mind, my work, my discipline, my sacrifices were already hers. She was simply accessing what she believed she was entitled to. That was the betrayal. Not the vacation. Not the lie. But the belief that I existed to fund her life without question. When I told her the cards would remain canceled, her voice changed again. Cold. "You're being controlling. You're punishing me. You always do this when I don't do what you want." The irony was almost unbearable. For nearly 3 decades, I had done nothing but make her life easier. And now, the first time I enforced a boundary, she called it abuse. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as a confused daughter and started seeing her as an adult making conscious choices. When the call ended, my hands were steady. I didn't pace. I didn't shout. I didn't second-guess myself. I opened a folder on my desk and labeled it with her name. Inside went the statements, the dates, the totals, evidence. Because I understood something important then. People who feel entitled don't stop when confronted. They escalate. And if she was willing to steal from me, lie to my face, and justify it as family privilege, then this wasn't going to end with a conversation. It was going to end with consequences. Legal ones. Permanent ones. The betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve. The hardest part wasn't accepting what my daughter had done. It was accepting what I had to do next. For 2 nights after that call, I barely slept. Not because I doubted the facts, but because I finally understood the consequences of ignoring them for so long. Every excuse I'd made for her, every boundary I failed to enforce, had led us here. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was a financial and legal problem. And problems like that don't get solved with emotions. They get solved with professionals. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in my attorney's office, a thick folder of documents resting on the polished conference table between us.
Bank statements, credit card records, a handwritten ledger with dates and totals. My lawyer, a man I trusted for over 15 years, flipped through the pages slowly. "This is extensive," he said finally. "It's systematic," I replied, "not impulsive." He nodded. "That's exactly how it reads." I told him everything: the vacation, the lies, the phrase that kept echoing in my head: family money. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "You need to understand something," he said. "What she did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was unauthorized use of funds. Legally, that matters." I felt an unexpected sense of relief hearing that. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because the fog was lifting. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't overreacting. "What are my options?" I asked.
He didn't hesitate. You can freeze access immediately, revoke authorized users. You can also modify any trust or estate documents you've set up, assuming you're mentally competent and acting voluntarily. I am. I don't doubt that, he said, but I need to ask this directly. Are you prepared for the fallout? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the social media posts she'd already begun hinting at, the way she reframed boundaries as control, how quickly she shifted from denial to accusation. "Yes," I said finally, "I am." He nodded once. Then we proceed carefully, quietly, cleanly. That word stuck with me. Cleanly. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, no emotional negotiations, just facts. He explained the trust documents I'd set up years ago, the ones I'd barely thought about since signing them. They were designed to protect assets until certain conditions were met, conditions I still controlled. "She hasn't vested yet," he said, "which means you have discretion." Discretion. Another word that felt heavier now. "What about my will?" I asked. "That can be changed immediately." I sat there in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the office air conditioning. For years, I'd assumed inheritance was automatic, something that flowed naturally through bloodlines. Now I understood something different. Inheritance is not an entitlement. It's a reflection of values. When I left his office, I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. That afternoon, I made another call. My son. "Dad," he answered, "everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," I said, "not as your father, as an adult." There was a pause. "Okay." I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him about the charges, the lies, the vacation, the phrase she used. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said finally. "Neither did I," I replied. When I told him about the trust fund and the changes I was considering, he pushed back. "That was meant for her," he said. "I don't feel right taking something that was hers." I almost smiled. That response told me everything. "That's exactly why you deserve it," I said quietly. We didn't argue. We didn't debate. We talked about responsibility, about effort, about how different choices lead to different outcomes. When we hung up, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The last ally I needed was myself. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, documents spread out in front of me. Trust papers, estate drafts, financial summaries that told a story my heart had resisted, but my mind now accepted. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. I wasn't destroying her life. I was stopping myself from enabling its destruction. The next steps were already forming. No warnings, no negotiations, just action.
Because if she had truly believed family meant freedom from consequences, then she was about to learn the truth. Family doesn't erase accountability. It demands it. I didn't announce what I was doing.
That was intentional. People who feel entitled thrive on confrontation. They feed on arguments, on emotional reactions, on the belief that if they talk long enough, they can bend reality back in their favor. I gave her none of that. Instead, I worked quietly, methodically. The first step was financial containment. Every account linked to my name was reviewed, line by line. Authorized users removed. Spending alerts activated. Limits lowered to 0 where necessary. I treated it like a breach because that's exactly what it was. Trust is a form of access, and access had been abused. The trust fund came next, the same one ID set up years earlier, imagining it as a gift, a final act of support once she was stable enough to use it wisely. My attorney walked me through the language carefully. Beneficiaries could be changed, conditions could be tightened, distributions could be delayed indefinitely, all legally, all clean. I signed without hesitation. There was no dramatic flourish, just ink on paper and a quiet sense of finality. That trust would no longer be her safety net. If she wanted money, she would have to earn it. The will was easier. Names removed, allocations reassigned. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it with precision. A man who has spent decades evaluating risk doesn't act impulsively when stakes are high. This was risk management. While I was doing this, she was posting. Instagram stories filled with filtered outrage and carefully framed victimhood. Long captions about emotional trauma, about toxic parents, about financial abuse. She never mentioned the credit card, never mentioned the unauthorized charges, never mentioned the lies. Of course she didn't. The truth doesn't perform well online. I watched without responding. Silence is uncomfortable for people who rely on noise to control a narrative. I knew she expected a reaction, a phone call, a message, a desperate attempt to explain myself. She got nothing. Days passed. Her tone online shifted from shock to anger, from anger to accusation, from accusation to righteousness. Strangers praised her bravery, encouraged her to cut me off, told her she deserved better. I let them, because none of them mattered. Facts don't change because an audience applauds. Behind the scenes, I continued preparing. I gathered records going back years, tuition payments, car purchases, rent assistance, credit card bailouts, trust fund deposits. I organized everything into a timeline. Not to punish her, to protect myself, because I knew what came next. People who believe they're entitled to something rarely accept loss quietly. When access is removed, they escalate. When manipulation fails, they look for leverage. Legal leverage. So I made sure I was ready. By the time she realized what was happening, it was already too late. She called repeatedly, left voicemails that shifted in tone hour by hour. Confusion, anger, tears, bargaining. I didn't listen to them. Not because I didn't care, because I cared enough not to give in. The trap wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was built on consistency. Every time she reached out and got no response, the reality settled in a little deeper. The money wasn't coming back. The rules had changed, and this time they were real. When the legal notifications were sent, they were brief, formal, impossible to argue with emotionally. She learned she had been removed as a beneficiary. She learned the trust fund was no longer hers. She learned that inheritance was no longer assumed. That was when the real panic began. Not because she lost luxury, because she lost certainty. Entitled people don't fear hardship. They fear unpredictability. And for the first time in her adult life, she was standing on unstable ground without a net beneath her. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I sat at my kitchen table that night and drank a cup of tea, staring out the window at a quiet street. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability, delivered without spectacle. And the silence? That was the loudest lesson of all. If silence was the lesson, arrogance was her response. Once she realized the money wasn't coming back, her behavior didn't soften. It sharpened. Like someone who believed volume could replace leverage, she doubled down on the only weapon she thought she had left: public opinion. Her posts became more frequent, more dramatic, carefully curated performances designed to frame herself as a victim of cruelty rather than the author of her own consequences. According to her, I wasn't a father enforcing boundaries. I was a tyrant. She spoke about control and manipulation, about growing up under constant pressure, about a childhood where love supposedly came with conditions. Every story omitted one crucial detail: the money, the theft, the lies. Strangers flooded her comments with sympathy, encouragement, validation. They told her she was brave, that she deserved better, that parents like me were the reason adult children needed therapy. I watched it unfold without responding. Arrogance has a predictable rhythm. When someone believes they are morally superior, they stop being careful. They stop considering consequences. They assume momentum will carry them forward. She began hinting at legal action, vague posts about standing up for herself, about taking power back, about holding abusers accountable. I recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't about healing. It was about punishment. She wanted me to panic, to reach out, to negotiate, to restore her access in exchange for peace. Instead, I did nothing. That infuriated her. Her calls turned hostile. Her messages shifted from pleading to accusation. She told mutual acquaintances I had always favored her brother, that I used money to control her choices, that I had promised her an inheritance and ripped it away to humiliate her. What struck me most wasn't the cruelty. It was the certainty. She truly believed she was right. In her mind, the trust fund wasn't something I had created. It was something she had lost, something stolen from her, something she deserved by default. That belief fueled her confidence, and confidence without grounding is dangerous. The final straw came when a mutual friend forwarded me a screenshot. My daughter had posted a long statement declaring she was preparing to take legal action against financial abuse. That was when I knew the storm had reached its peak. People at their most arrogant believe they are untouchable, that the narrative they've constructed will shield them from facts. They forget that courts don't care about hashtags. They care about evidence. I forwarded the screenshot to my attorney without comment. His reply came back less than an hour later. Good. Let her file. That night, I slept deeply. Not because I enjoyed what was coming, but because I had done everything right. Every decision documented, every boundary justified, every dollar traceable. Her arrogance wasn't strength. It was overconfidence born from never having faced real consequences before. She had mistaken silence for weakness, and she was about to learn the difference. The lawsuit arrived on a Friday morning. A courier rang my doorbell at exactly 9:12 a.m., clipboard in hand, expression neutral. He asked for my name, confirmed my identity, and placed a thick envelope into my hands. "You've been served," he said. I thanked him, closed the door, and stood there for a moment in the quiet hallway, the weight of the envelope heavier than paper should have been. This was the moment she thought would break me. I sat at the dining table, opened the envelope carefully, and began reading. The language was dramatic, accusatory, carefully crafted to provoke emotion rather than convey truth. According to the filing, I had engaged in years of psychological manipulation, financial abuse, emotional coercion. The trust fund was described as promised compensation for suffering. The canceled vacation was framed as deliberate sabotage meant to cause humiliation. She was seeking $250,000 in damages. I read it twice, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to understand how thoroughly she had rewritten our history. In her version, I was a monster. In reality, I was a man who had paid for her entire life. I didn't panic. I didn't call her. I picked up the phone and dialed my attorney. "I've been served," I said. "I expected that," he replied calmly. "Bring everything." By noon, we were sitting across from each other, the lawsuit spread out on his desk next to my documentation. Bank statements, trust agreements, screenshots of her social media posts, a timeline of unauthorized charges going back months. He reviewed everything slowly, occasionally making notes. "This is not a strong case," he said finally. "She thinks it is," I replied. "She thinks emotion will outweigh evidence. It won't." He outlined the response strategy clearly. We would not counterattack publicly. We would not engage online. We would respond formally, thoroughly, and decisively. The truth would be enough. When I left his office, I felt something close to relief. The hammer had dropped, just not on me. That afternoon, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. I answered. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Her voice was tight, brittle. "You didn't have to turn this into a war." "You did that," I replied calmly. "I'm defending myself," she snapped. "No," I said. "You're avoiding responsibility." There was a pause. Then anger. "You think this is over? You think you can just erase me and walk away?" "I didn't erase you," I said. "You erased yourself." She laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." I said nothing, because regret belongs to people who act without thinking. I had done nothing else. The next step was formal. Legal notifications were sent, responses filed, evidence attached. Every accusation answered with dates, amounts, and documentation. Her story collapsed under its own weight. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because reality has momentum, and lies, no matter how loud, eventually run out of ground. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It never does. At first, there were confident statements from her lawyer, requests for extensions, motions filled with dramatic language but thin substance. They believed intimidation would work where entitlement had failed. It didn't. My attorney responded with precision. No insults, no emotional appeals, just documents, statements, timelines, proof. Every unauthorized charge was listed. Every payment I had made over the years was documented. Tuition invoices, car purchases, rent assistance, trust fund deposits and withdrawals. The canceled vacation wasn't framed as retaliation. It was framed as mitigation of ongoing financial abuse. The narrative flipped. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether I had hurt her feelings. It was whether she had committed fraud. Her confidence began to crack. Depositions were scheduled. Questions asked that couldn't be answered with social media slogans. She struggled when asked to explain how she paid for her lifestyle. She contradicted herself when confronted with dates and amounts. Under oath, entitlement sounds different. It sounds hollow. Her lawyer advised settlement. She refused. That was hubris talking again. The belief that she could still force me to fold, that I'd cave to avoid embarrassment, that blood would override facts. Then came the moment everything unraveled. During discovery, my attorney submitted evidence of her public posts accusing me of abuse while simultaneously demanding access to my money. Screenshots, timestamps, messages sent minutes apart. The judge wasn't impressed. When the ruling on preliminary motions came down, it was devastating for her case. Several claims were dismissed outright. Others were narrowed so severely they lost their leverage. Her lawyer requested a private meeting. I agreed. She sat across the table from me, eyes tired, posture smaller than I remembered. The anger was gone, replaced by fear. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said quietly. "That's the problem," I replied. "You never think about how far things go. You just take the next step and assume I'll fix it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I just wanted things to go back to how they were." How they were, I said, was unsustainable. The lawsuit was withdrawn 2 weeks later. No apology, no public retraction, just a quiet filing and a sudden silence online. Her followers moved on. The internet always does. But consequences don't disappear just because attention fades. She lost more than a case. She lost credibility. She lost leverage. She lost the illusion that she could rewrite reality if she spoke loudly enough. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I felt something closer to exhaustion, followed by relief. The collapse was complete, not because I won, but because the truth did. When everything was finally over, the silence felt different. Not heavy, not tense, clean. I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't checked my phone for hours. No missed calls. No legal notifications. No carefully worded messages demanding explanations or forgiveness. Just quiet. For the first time in years, my life wasn't revolving around damage control. I returned to simple routines. Morning walks. Reading the paper without distraction. Cooking meals without rushing. The kind of peace that only comes when you stop carrying someone else's chaos. My daughter didn't disappear overnight. She resurfaced slowly, cautiously, stripped of confidence and entitlement. No luxury photos, no inspirational captions, just reality. She took a full-time job, a modest apartment, no safety net, no shortcuts. We spoke only once after everything ended. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask to be reinstated. She apologized. Not dramatically, not defensively, just quietly. "I understand now," she said, "what I did, what I lost." I listened. I didn't promise anything, because trust isn't restored by words. It's rebuilt through consistent behavior over time. As for my son, the change was immediate. He never celebrated, never acted entitled to what I had reassigned to him. He thanked me once, then went back to his life, the same way he always had, responsible, steady, earned. That's what legacy really is. Not money, not inheritance, but values that survive when money is gone. I didn't cut my daughter off out of cruelty. I cut her off to stop lying to both of us. Kindness without boundaries is weakness. And love without accountability isn't love at all. Today, my house feels lighter. My decisions feel cleaner. And my conscience is quiet. I didn't win a war. I ended a cycle. And that was worth everything.